Good morning and welcome to this United States Energy Association virtual press briefing. I am Llewellyn King, a broadcaster and syndicated columnist and the creator and host of these briefings. Today, the subject before us is wildfire and its avoidance, management, and suppression for electric utilities. As usual, a panel of experts will be questioned by a panel of senior journalists who write about energy. Before we get going, Mark Menzies, President and CEO of the USEA, will now welcome you and describe the mission of the USEA now in its centenary year. Mark?
Thank you, Llewellyn, and welcome everyone to USEA's virtual press briefing. As Llewellyn described, this month's topic is the impact of wildfires on our utilities, their efforts to prevent them or harden their systems, to protect from them, and other efforts underway to address this threat to our electric system. Today, as Llewellyn said, we're pleased to host an esteemed panel of experts and journalists. But before we begin, just a few words about USEA. USEA is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution founded back in 1924 as the U.S. member to the World Energy Council. Today, we convene and conduct forums and workshops for the public, our members, energy stakeholders, and we sponsor educational events such as today's press briefing on timely and important energy topics. USEA also supports global access to affordable and reliable energy in partnership with the U.S. government. You can learn more about us at our website, usea.org. And with that, I send it back to Llewellyn and our panelists.
Thank you, Mark. Before I introduce the panels, I'd like to recognize Melissa Brown of the USEA for her essential assistance in putting together these briefings. The expert panel, Julia Ham, partner at the Ad Hoc Group, Chris Gutman-McCabe, Chief Regulatory and Communications Officer, and Terex, Brian Hannigan, President and CEO, Holy Cross Energy, Doug Dorr, Technical Executive, EPRI, Indran Andy Ratakan, Chief Growth Officer, Technosilva, Brett Lexperience, CEO, Dauntless Air, Tim Barrett, CEO, Gridware, and Rebecca O'Neill, Advisor, Pacific Northwest Laboratory. The journalistic panel, Jennifer Hiller. Is Jennifer with us yet from the Wall Street Journal? She's supposed to be here, but maybe she's been held up. Ken Silverstein, Forbes, Peter Bear, Politico, E&E News, Adam Clayton Powell, The Third, PBS, and Rod Cookrow, Freelance. And I'd like to begin with you, Rod Cookrow, for the first question.
No, well, thank you, Llewellyn. It's good to be here again. In thinking about this topic, and I've written about it a number of times, particularly in the late 2019, 20, 21 timeframe when wildfires in the West in particular were more widespread and more prolonged than they had ever been before. My question to any of the experts would be this. Have any of the recent budget cuts at the National Weather Service or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where they have advanced forecasting tools for not just wildfires, but for other types of natural disasters, have any of those budget cuts sort of diminished the ability of the industry and the government, and both the state and local level, to figure out what may be happening during wildfire season? And if so, are there technologies that can be employed by the industry to counteract the effects of those federal budget cuts?
Who would like to take that? How about Brian Hannigan?
Hey, good morning. Thank you for that question. Holy Cross Energy is a rural electric cooperative utility located in the mountains of western Colorado, about 2 hours west of the Denver metro area along the I-70 corridor. We are served by and work in partnership with the National Weather Service office based in Grand Junction, as well as the National Weather Service office based in Boulder. Grand Junction provides a number of fire weather resources on their website and through publicly available briefings. And we have not detected any impact to those services that support our area along the western slope of Colorado. We do supplement the available information that we get from the National Weather Service with our own network of sensors that we share with regional partners, including our first responders and our local counties in the area that we serve. That actually is near and dear to my heart as a trained non-practicing meteorologist who happens to run an electric utility, and one that also operates with a high degree of renewable energy resources. So weather and climate data is super important to our business, whether it's looking at the availability of our power supply, the conditions under which we operate our distribution and transmission system, the demand for electricity. I think weather and climate data are increasingly important to electric utilities in general, and it certainly informs a significant amount of our wildfire mitigation strategy. But at present, we've not seen any diminishment in the services offered by the Weather Service, and we would certainly support continuation in that regard.
Thank you. Doug Dorr, do you have anything to say on the subject?
So I have not heard a single thing on the topic, either pro or con.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll go to Ken Silverstein of Forbes. Ken?
Yeah, thank you, Llewellyn. My question is really about technology, and it would go to utility executives or those who buy such technologies in the market. Which technologies are you guys using to either predict in advance an adverse weather event or to deal with it after the fact? Anything from satellites to drones to whatever technology you're using that would mitigate disaster.
Who would like to take that? Noni, how about Indy?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, Indy Ratnathakam with TechnoSilva. We're a provider of prediction technologies for wildfire and extreme weather. So I think there's a lot of answers to the question. I think there's a lot of things being used out there right now, Ken. With for prediction, AI is a fantastic tool for the use of this. So we're working with about 25 utilities across the country right now who are getting 5-day ahead forecasts of wildfire events, in addition to long-term risk prediction, exactly sort of precisely for locations of their assets, as well as general for their communities as well. So these things allow them to do things like public safety power shutoffs, if necessary, as well as short-term mitigations. So a lot of these things I think are in wide use now and giving us fairly strong prediction. I think there was one of our clients, Fortis Alberta, stood up at WEI the other day and told about a story about how they actually sent crews to a site in Alberta 2 days or 3 days ahead of of a wind event, because the weather was totally clear, and they said, I don't know, why you're sending anybody there. The weather's fine. Sure enough, a wind event hit. Power lines went down. They were able to solve it and mitigate and avert a power shutoff, or a power outage. And of course, if there had been a fire, they would have been on top of it as well.
Can I follow up with you very briefly, which is to ask, could you explain in very simple terms how you're able to predict in advance that these things are coming and what exactly transpires, while you're there?
Yeah, look, our goal is to take something very, very complicated and make it very simple, so utilities of all sizes can use it, and fire agencies as well. They're also our customers. So the idea is that fire science has given us a lot of information about the hundreds or even thousands of variables that can affect the likelihood of a fire. So all the weather components, dead fuel, moisture, live fuel, moisture, the actual fuels on the ground, the topography, et cetera. So we're taking all of these into account on a daily, hourly basis, and recalculating all the possible, combinations of what is likely to happen and what could happen. So we're running 1 billion simulations a day to figure out the likely outcomes at a sort of a 2 kilometer resolution.
Okay, your next question, Peter Babb, Politico's E&E News. Peter.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. Experts like Stanford's Michael Wara say that the Western wildfire crisis is a societal challenge. It's not just starting with climate change, which is where the Democrats, many of them want to start. It's not just forest management or environmental regulation, which is where President Trump and many Republicans want to start. It's a great many things. Environmental rules, climate change, housing and zoning codes, forest ministry, utility conduct, backward-looking regulation. How do we get to a societal solution that puts everything on the table, including climate change? Maybe Julia and India could start out with that, please.
Oh, you got to give me the toughest question. My gosh. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we as a nation would benefit from a very holistic approach to the issue. Right now, a lot of the way in which this issue is being dealt with is very much state by state, utility by utility. There are efforts underway by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, to work on national policy and have, again, a more holistic and cohesive approach. But again, it can't just be focused on, to your point, it cannot just be focused on the electric utility industry either. You know, we need to be thinking about across all sectors, and how do we coordinate in a very effective way. And I think about it in some ways akin, to when there are other natural disasters, when we think, and cybersecurity threats, right? The electric utility industry is very good in working in partnership with the federal government, with state and local agencies on responses, both preparation and response to those types of issues. And I think some sort of similar approach on wildfire would actually be very beneficial to society.
If I may, Llewellyn and Peter, to
Sure.
me, and Julia touched on this, and I think it's spot on. Peter, you raised a range of things that underpin the wildfire issue, but the fact of the matter is utilities are facing, and people like Brian are facing an incredibly new reality just in the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? Julia hit cybersecurity. We see more intense, more frequent, more intelligent, more state-sponsored cyber incursions. We're seeing more intense, more frequent, damaging weather patterns. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, right? I experienced it firsthand. We're seeing a call for decarbonization still, even though maybe not so much at the federal level, but we're seeing a call to integrate distributed renewable energy. We're seeing just an explosion in the call for electrification. We're talking about data centers and integrating AI at the same time that we're telling utilities they're not allowed to raise rates. And so to me, whether it's the micro question of wildfires or the macro question of the new reality that utilities are facing, the answer is investment, to be quite frank. It's modernization. From a wildfire perspective, there are certainly things you can do in advance, and Brian and I'm sure his team and many utility executives do. The hardening where you can, the undergrounding, the clearing out of the rights of way. But then everything else after that involves data. Everything that Indy was talking about, it's all about capturing, analyzing, aggregating, and acting upon data. And my company is a wireless broadband company. We've got 7 large utilities across 15 states. Many of them are wildfire states, and they're deploying advanced broadband in order to be able to capture and analyze and then act upon in milliseconds this data. So wildfires is the intense micro issue. The macro issue is the reality of what Brian and others are facing, this sort of new reality.
Rebecca O'Neill from PNNL, do you have something to add to that?
Absolutely. I think I caught that last bit the most, where you sort of had that forward look about what does this mean when we're thinking about the future. And Mike Wara is absolutely a great resource at Stanford. I think there's 2 things to think about. One is that just to highlight here, I think Chris did a nice job saying that this is a massive issue, that the wildfire issue is enormous. of course, but one is that utilities that have been thinking about climate for a long time, and many of them have, working with EPRI on Climate Ready, those are the same capabilities that they're using to think about wildfire, because they are thinking about the risk attributes and the enormous aspects of what's the future hold. So not just the current conditions, but how do all of these things come together to prepare utilities for climate resilience? There are some risk frameworks that I think I see the utilities basically mapping one-to-one from, I've used this risk framework to think about what's coming, and I need to look at it ahead. So a lot of utilities have been thinking in this lane for a while. I think Chris also highlighted, and in your question you highlighted, there's this unique new piece of it, which is the ignition risk. And that's really taken over a lot of the conversation. So what was before a conversation about how do we protect customers and infrastructure from other wildfire activities and partner with landowners, et cetera, this question of ignition risk is really a different one. And that's where things are changing around what is the right level of investment in order to protect the business, in order to provide reliable service. And that's where these kinds of questions have gotten out of whack, because that's a very different, that's almost a business question at that point. So I really do encourage you to keep asking the question that you did, Peter, because I think there are some unique attributes where you can sort of say, if I want to future-proof my system, and I want to think about ignition risk, and I want to protect against wildfire, and I want to exist as a business in 10 years, what are the investments that actually get me there, as opposed to the investments that just get me through this fire season, right? And so we do see some utilities that are investing in grid enhancing technologies, or investing in situational awareness tools like Indy just talked about, that really up their game in understanding what is happening across their entire system. And those are enabling technologies for building the grid of the future, or building more technologies to support customer interests at the end of the day and ensure reliable service. So this question of what's ahead, what's not just the 1-year plan to get us through the season, but what's the 10-year plan that gets us through all of these challenging issues is a really important one. I appreciate the question.
If I can build upon what Rebecca just said, one trend that we're seeing as we see wildfire risk become on the radars of not just the Western utilities, but moving further east, particularly with both the utilities and the regulators, is really beginning to think about not just how technology deployment, the use of AI, not just what's the value from a wildfire perspective, but what is the broader value to system resilience, reliability, especially when it comes to other, again, extreme weather events, but rising temperatures, more extreme heat, more extreme cold. So we are seeing a lot of interest, again, particularly from regulators, in understanding what is the value to customers of each investment, not just through a narrow lens of wildfire, but more holistically across the system, and ultimately value to the customers.
Thank you. Adam Clayton Powell, PBS.
If you drill down, some things are quite fundamental. This is from the Western Fire Chiefs Association. When a tree becomes overgrown and its branches expand and reach the power lines, a fire can ignite. Also, low-hanging branches touching a power line. But here's what the fire chiefs say is the solution: rigorous vegetation management. So what is the barrier to rigorous vegetation management? Are we talking about political restrictions? Are we talking about economic restrictions? What are the barriers? What are the restrictions on rigorous vegetation management?
I'm happy to try to jump on that one, if you guys can hear me okay. And this might address some of the other questions. This is Brett Lesperance. I'm the CEO of a company called Dauntless Air. We own and operate 20 aerial firefighting aircraft that fight fires across the United States, Alaska, and Canada in some cases. And we're actually the folks that try to put out the fires. There's unfortunately not enough of these type of aircraft out there, but two overarching issues, regardless of why we have more wildfires today, we do. But two overarching issues that are a constant challenge for the folks who are trying to manage this wildfire risk are the thing you just brought up, Adam, which is, we need more rigorous forest thinning and prescribed burns in the times of year when fires won't take off, the winter, the wetter months, to start clearing out this densely packed forest. And what holds that up is all the environmental regulations that have been developed over the last 3 or 4 decades, which all had the best intentions, and now unfortunately unintended consequences of building a very densely packed forest that now, when it dries out, it's like a matchbook. You like one end of the matchbook and it flames up really quickly and covers an inch or two in less than a second. You take that issue combined with the lack of an enforcement of response times. The NFPA Act of NFPA 1710 from the 70s, early 80s was an act that required a 911 call to have a response to your house on any emergency, fire, health, break-in, in 5 minutes and 20 seconds. That regulation reduced the number of people who died in structural fires by 2/3 and reduced the number of firefighters who died in structural fires by 2/3. No such response time requirement exists on any federal lands in this country. So the Forest Service, the BLM, the BIA, they have a fire because they don't have the dollars to do enough of the forest thinning they'd like to do, or they get fought by every lawyer out there that wants to fight them on public lands to thin things or to harvest and sell the property. They often use fire as a tool. We'll let that fire start, we'll let it skunk around for a little bit, clean up the forest, and oftentimes those fires turn into conflagrations that can take out entire towns and kill people. We have to stop pretending that this is a seasonal issue, that's a summer issue, and we have to start fighting wildfires like we fight structural fires, and you can't send people as quickly as you'd like to, because a lot of these places are hard to get to by car or truck. Send aircraft, make a response time requirement of 30 minutes to get an aircraft over a fire very quickly and start pounding that fire, regardless who owns the land, because it might start on federal lands, but it almost always runs into private or state lands or vice versa. And the technology that Indy's company and other companies have out there to be able to help you predict where the fire threat is greatest in the state can allow you to move those firefighting aircraft closer to those fires to reduce your response time, control the fire, and reduce the risk to electrical utilities infrastructures as well as neighborhoods. And it's something that we need to continue to ask our state and federal regulators and Congress. We're doing that quite often. That they've got to push the agencies who are responsible for allowing the thinning of the forests to occur, but also to start responding to wildfire starts much more quickly than we ever have before.
Rich, sorry, could I just go ahead? Who was that?
So, as the utility in the room, I want to reiterate how important vegetation management is as a central part of our overall wildfire mitigation plan, which is available on our website at holycross.com. One of the things that we've noticed is that we've, like most utilities, have moved from a regular cut cycle where we go to different parts of our service territory and manage the vegetation in a fairly linear sort of way, to a more AI-informed risk-based management approach where we're actually surveying with satellites, with multispectral cameras, with data on the biologic elements, the chlorophyll content, the greenness, et cetera, of trees. We're able to zoom in on those dead and dying timber resources or those diseased trees, which present risks to fall-ins along our rights of way. The more we look, the more we find. And I don't think that we're alone in that regard in terms of the increasing demand for vegetation management. And the barriers that exist to addressing that vegetation management need in a timely manner really depend on who owns the land. On federal and state lands, it's competing with the multiple uses, whether it's recreation or other specified uses laid out on the law. And of course, as previous speaker mentioned, there are permitting requirements from a regulatory perspective. More pertinent to us, honestly, are private lands and landowner opposition to their favorite tree being trimmed, or their need to establish defensible space around their structures. Many people settle in the wildland-urban interface, the so-called WUI, because they love the rural setting, because they love everything about the wildlands that creates that fire risk. And so going back to Peter's question, we absolutely need this to be a societal question. The great majority of wildfires are not started by power systems. They are started by lightning, and they are started by humans doing other stupid things, like not putting out their campfires or shooting off tracer bullets during a red flag alert to impress their boyfriend or their girlfriend. And so it has to be a all of society effort. We really even need to be thinking about where we allow development in wildfire prone areas and how we invest in infrastructures right from the get-go to provide, as Julia, pointed out, a more resilient infrastructure on the basis. But a lot of it is public education, which is also a key element of our wildfire mitigation strategy for our co-op members.
Can I add one more barrier from the investor-owned utility perspective? Vegetation management is almost always coming out of the O&M budget, right? It's a business model issue. They are not earning a regulated rate of return on that veg management spend. O&M budgets, they're always looking to shrink those. They're getting pressure from shareholders, from regulators, from others to shrink O&M budgets because of affordability concerns for customers. So I do think there's lots of reasons to rethink the utility business model and sort of how things are paid for. But I do think thinking about where veg management, how that is treated within the framework, it currently is one of the barriers, I think, to more effective use of veg management.
I just had a quick question for Brett, and that is, Brett, who pays you? Is it the utility? Is it the landowner? Or is it the state?
Indirectly, the answer to all those is yes, but we get paid directly by either the state agency, typically the Department of Natural Resources, or a federal agency, which would be the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and through the taxes that we all pay, both as companies as well as individuals, those dollars are funneled to emergency service assets like ours.
Thank you. Next question from Rod Kokro.
Thank you, Llewellyn. There was some news a few weeks ago out of the Interior Department when Secretary Burgum signed an order establishing a new federal agency, which is in and of itself, I think, interesting at a time when most of the federal government is shrinking. And this new agency is called the U.S. Wildland Fire Service, and it moves the primary responsibility for managing wildfires from the federal aspect from the U.S. Forest Service at the Ag Department to the Interior Department. And there are a number of things that are intended to accrue to the management of fires from these changes. And my fundamental question for anyone on this panel is, was this sort of change in federal wildfire management, which seems significant, and it may actually have to be approved by Congress in the long run, was the industry consulted? Was there a collaborative process where the industry was asked by the government, how do you think we're doing now? Are there deficiencies that we can solve by doing something with the way the government manages these wildfire incidents going forward? Does anybody know the answer to that question?
I can address it from where, industry being the aerial firefighting industry. I obviously can't speak to it from the utility side of things. It's something that whether you run trucks, bulldozers, contract crews on the ground or aircraft, we have been pushing for some time, because the two federal agencies that manage aerial resources or ground resources are the Forest Service and the BLM to the great extent. And there are redundant operations within each of those two verticals. And oftentimes it was a battle during fire season or in response to a fire of who is going to go where first. The ordering system for assets is very slow, very, very outdated, very legacy based. And the disconnect between those two entities alone oftentimes slowed our ability to respond to fires in a way that kept them small. It's pretty simple. Keep small fires small and things are better, right? We have the ability to do that. We have the technology from companies like Indies and others that can tell us better than ever before where we might have a fire risk. We have assets, probably not enough of them, but we have assets. If we responded with more quickly, we would be able to stop fires from growing as large as they have been. This consolidation of these two entities, which isn't going to go smoothly, I'm sure, right? These things never do, should end up resulting in a more streamlined response from the federal agency that will now be responsible for, getting assets, again, whether they're aerial assets or ground assets, to a fire start in a more coordinated and quick manner going forward. So we actually, we started an industry in the aerial space called the United Aerial Firefighters Association about 3 years ago with the aim to try to work towards this kind of consolidation and increasing the efficiency and response times of any of these assets to fire starts going forward. So we've seen it in earlier this year, the new Forest Service chief made a commitment to the Forest Service employees in the industry that they were going to focus more on rapid initial attack than they ever had before. And if you look at some of the stats for this year's fire season, we are in, it's been an interesting season to watch. We've actually had well more fire starts than our 10-year national average. Typically, by this time in the year, we'll have had 45,000 wildfire starts. As of this year, we've had 51,000, so we're 5,000 starts ahead. But we are behind the 10-year national average on actual acres burned. The 10-year national average of acres burned is about 6.3 million acres from those 45,000 starts. This year, we're at 4.4 million acres, just under 4.5 million acres, actually, from the 51,000 starts. And we feel in the industry that has a lot to do with this new commitment to responding to fires quickly and not waiting for ground forces to get there. And you start hitting the fire with water retardant, and then the folks on the ground get there and put out the fire. That may be, hopefully, an indication of more things to come in the future based on this consolidated agency.
Thank you. Tim, you're a frontline man. Do you have something to add here?
Yeah, absolutely. I can specifically answer that question. I had the opportunity to observe this legislation evolve. I am directly familiar with a lot of participation from various agencies in crafting that legislation. I think it's going to be hugely impactful in the procurement cycle. I think there are a lot of very impactful technologies that are available and ready to be deployed. We like to use the term shovel ready, and yet they get caught up in the procurement cycles that used to exist. And so I think, when I review this new agency, I'm hopeful that new methods of procurement, more efficient and faster methods of procurement will be developed.
Thank you. Next, somebody else.
Sorry, if I could just add one little bit to what Tim and Brett have said. The consolidation of the agencies, I think, to Brett's point, can be helpful, and to Tim's point, be helpful on streamlining. And I think the larger issue here is that the firefighters out there, our national firefighters, need the help. As Brett pointed out, the number of fires is going up dramatically. The risk across the country, which used to be isolated in the West and is now, we've seen fires in New Jersey, in North Carolina, in Minnesota this year, in places that we wouldn't have expected, the threat is effectively going up for all of us. But, a lot of national budgets right now are going down to flat. Whereas the tools that they described, whether it's ours at TechnoSilva, Tim's at Gridware, Brett's at Dauntless, all of these tools and the firefighters themselves need all the things that they can get in order to meet the growing need.
Can I just add one thing quickly to that?
Sure,
the number of people, young people who can do the job, which is typically under 30, who want to go into wildland firefighting, continues to drop every year because we're not paying them well enough. They get paid less than you would get paid at starting a job at McDonald's. So unfortunately, we have less and less people in the woods to put the fires out, just at a time when we need more of those people on the ground. It's a conundrum that isn't going to solve itself until we can fix that point of the puzzle.
Thank you, Brett. Let's take a question from Ken Silverstein at Forbes.
We've spoken about a holistic approach to managing wildfires, everything from forest management to controlling CO2 emissions. I did a piece, it came out yesterday, where Net Tracker Zero ranked corporations and the efforts that they're doing to control CO2 emissions, and it looped in there that that it's not enough because the number of extreme events are rising. This conversation has opened my mind to a certain extent, and I'm wondering if we're able, I don't know that we're able to quantify or rank the variables in terms of which ones are the most responsible from 1 to 10 or whatever, in terms of igniting these extreme events? Is it CO2 and global warming? Is it forest management? Is it lack of technology implementation? What exactly, how do you guys think about this?
I'm happy to take this one.
Sure.
I think it's important to understand that every ignition is not equal. It really depends on the conditions at the time of the ignition. And the most catastrophic ignitions tend to happen during the highest winds and extreme weather events. And so I think from a utility perspective, one of the most promising opportunities to avoid catastrophe after doing as much vegetation management as possible is to use a tool of last resort, because we have now, the utilities are getting really good and deploying tools at understanding where their risk is highest and also when their risk is highest in those areas. And during those time periods, there really isn't a lot that you can do to prepare or respond and suppress. And, having seen the carnage firsthand, after Black Saturday in Victoria, some of you may be familiar with that event, 187 people passed away. I was called in 7 days after the fire to begin rebuilding the grid. And let me tell you, people learn to live with fire in rural Australia. It's a common occurrence. It's a regular occurrence. And yet, despite all the efforts that they do to clear their property, fuel management, they construct their homes halfway into the ground, double glazed windows, no exterior wood, all of that. The whole communities were decimated. And so to control for ignitions during these extreme periods of risk, the utilities often have to go to a tool of last resort, which is to switch the power off. And so I'm a huge supporter of creating the necessary environment and acceptance within public, so that during these conditions where the risk is so high in certain areas, the utility is empowered to deploy this tool. And it's not a single bullet solution, but those are the ignitions that are going to cause the most amount of damage.
Llewellyn, if I can, I don't disagree with Tim, but I also, I don't think a proactive power shutoff can be. I mean, I think it has to be our tool of last resort, right? I think there needs to be, and certainly there is, and every tool in the toolbox approach that leads up to that tool of last resort, right? There is, for instance, San Diego Gas and Electric and Schweitzer Engineering have jointly developed a falling conductor protection that de-energizes a broken line before it hits the ground, 1.2 seconds. That prevents the ignition source, and they've deployed it. We were part of the investigation because it needed high-speed, low-latency communications. But to me, there is an every tool in the toolbox approach to this, because you do more and more. We're having those events, Tim, that you referenced, those opportunities that you referenced: high winds, dry conditions, low dew point. You can go on and on. Chlorophyll content is low. We're in a XYZ. We haven't done sufficient vegetation management. So to me, it is. And then I would argue quickly bringing in Brett and his team once something does ignite. So to me, there's a prepare, there's a prevent, and there's a respond element to every one of these.
Yeah.
But very quickly, utilities are becoming better and better thanks to technologies, including TechnoSilva and others, are getting much more surgical about where turning off the power is truly needed. And so we're getting to the point where those decisions are impacting fewer and fewer customers. We're also seeing utilities who are very thoughtfully understanding the risk profile within their service territory, and in the highest risk areas, going customer to customer, understanding who has critical medical needs that require the power to be on, and therefore proactively providing those customers with battery backup systems. So, I think as this issue, we're still in very early days for most of the country, but I think as the industry matures around these issues, we will get to a point where using PSPS as a tool will be minimally negatively impactful to customers. And the positive, right, the risk removal by making that decision will ultimately be in everyone's best interest. Agree, can't be done, without a significant amount of thought and a lot of advancement in getting as surgical as possible. But I think that's the trajectory that the industry is on.
And just to double click on that, I feel like PSPS is not deployed enough and there's too much hesitancy, especially with the tools that are available and how surgical the utilities can get. And we're seeing utilities here in California get really good at getting, I call it the perfect public safety power shutoff. And there's this world that we could potentially get to where the utilities switch the grid off dynamically and switch it back on in short bursts as risk travels over the landscape and then immediately re-energize. And it's just way too powerful of a tool to be being hesitant on.
I took
it
Tim's
is
question to be more about the origins of fire. And I'm wondering, because I think, Tim, this is an incredible conversation, actually, and a bit controversial. And so I love that you're willing to jump in there and offer that opinion, because that is a difficult area. But Ken, I think there is quite a lot to say about utilities are not doing this alone. Still, the vast majority of reliability events that affect utilities are wildfire they did not cause. And so what we're talking about when we think about wildfire looking ahead is actually more of a partnerships outside for the utilities. So we need the states to engage. The states are engaging. They have agencies that have responsibilities for wildfire, and they are actively tracking the causes of the wildfire, the risk areas. They have a lot of that apparatus in place. And so we do see new partnerships between state agencies that are responsible for oversight of utilities or energy offices working with the land management agencies. This is essential because they understand wildfire and they understand wildfire activity over the last 3 decades, and they have the capabilities to look ahead. And that way the utilities have more opportunities to know what new areas of the state are likely to occur, and they can work in a landscape partnership rather than exclusively in the corridor, because if all they can do is work in the corridor, they really have limited options like PSPS when it comes to it. But still, the vast majority of these wildfires that are affecting utility systems and affecting reliabilities are not ones that they cause, or they're not active de-energizing in order to avoid ignition. There's still a lot of activity that is simply affecting the systems directly. And so when you're asking this question about where do those come from, and there are differences in fire behavior, depending on whether you're in grasslands, right, or you're in big forests. And so a lot of the states are tracking what new areas of this country are likely to experience wildfire. And that's part of the dynamic that's really important. There are new communities that have never had wildfire before that are going to be the next era. And so there's a big focus on wildfire resources for those communities, education to those utilities about what they can do to interact with the wildfire that's coming for them, whether it's in the Olympic Peninsula or it's in, the high plains. Both of those areas are look ahead areas where we need to be paying attention as well. So I really appreciate the question about fire behavior, who's paying attention, and all of these factors that are shifting. Some of the most fires that we're tracking the most closely are emerging risk areas. And so that's why you see states like Minnesota, Kansas, Dakotas, Texas, a lot of those states on that eastern edge are really ramping up their awareness of wildfire because it's not something they can control just through a utility oversight function. It's something that has to be a land management partnership. So it's an excellent question.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Doug Orr of EPRI what they do and what their position with wildfire research is. Doug?
All right. So just historically, I've been doing this for about 8 years. So it's not the last couple of years. It's been a while, and probably the key area where we have focused recently is with the U.S. Department of Energy. We facilitated some wildfire advisory groups over the past 3 years. Rebecca with PNNL has been part of those, and many of the other national labs as well. And we identified a vision of the future, meaning 2030 aspirations for the utility industry that kind of define, at least from a utilities perspective, what we can do to reduce the risk and what we can't do. So I'll tell you about how we can reduce the risk first. We've got a couple of things. One is a technology database that was developed. So if any utility anywhere in the world is using this given technology to reduce risk in some way for wildfire, it's in the catalog. There's about 52 technologies in there, including everything that you that's represented on this call from Gridware and TechnoSilva, other things like distribution fault anticipators and many other technologies. I'll say the biggest hitter in my mind is the one called ground level distribution. It's a hybrid where we're hardening the system without undergrounding it and without putting it up in the air where it's exposed to wind and ice and other weather. So it's on the ground and it's safe. So there's a series of these technologies, but I think more importantly, what we identified where it's really difficult for the utility industry to do anything, unless you're really good at predicting the weather and you have satellite imagery telling you exactly what the conditions of your vegetation are. It's these fire weather days. There are many more of them every year in these areas where we never had fire weather or fire risk before. And the utility is responsible for less than 1% of the vegetation. It's the vegetation in the rights of way. The vegetation that hasn't burned for the past 100 years is just ground fuel that's waiting to burn. And we put it out when it burns, and so that ground fuel is left to burn the next fire. The second thing is just simply the weather and this change in the climate and the weather that, for whatever reasons, is creating additional days every year where the risk is severe enough that we have to either shut the grid off or surgically protect those areas where we have too high a risk. So from an EPRI standpoint, it's really about understanding the technologies, how we can get better at national weather prediction, not utility-specific weather prediction, how we can get better at understanding that fuel map of the entire globe, or at least North America, and what the daily risk is of that fuel burning. And taking that and trying to understand what we practically can do from a situational awareness standpoint, and then a response standpoint.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Mark Menzies, a former Deputy Secretary of Energy, who might give us a perspective of how the department, at least in his day, looked at the wildfire problem. Mark?
Well, thank you, Llewellyn, and thank you, panelists. I think you've sort of touched on most of the significant issues. I mean, 10 years ago, with the digitization of so much data the utilities had, we developed models to where utilities could use that data in ways to then make predictive upgrades on their system, maintenance, that kind of analysis. And now with the development of P&L's, modeling capabilities, Indy's company, and some of the other panelists, now you can bring in the greater picture of the meteorology surrounding these different events. And so it seems as though utilities now are put in the position to take advantage of some of these technologies that have developed from EPRI, deploy them using the now AI to use the digital data on their systems, right, as to where the upgrades can go and the improvements can go. And then you couple that with Indy and some of these other technologies. And I think then, to be honest, not that there's the only thing, but this is a more of a collaborative effort that I know DOE, has been working on for years. And then the other point was what you saw the other week, I guess last week, when there was an announcement in the Trump administration to try to coordinate the efforts to be able to take action when identified that with respect to vegetation management. So historically, vegetation management has really been an issue of increased prices on consumers, right? Regulators typically would only allow so much in the rate base for vegetation management, and it had competing interests. We saw when we were at DOE, some of the California utilities, really because of their state utility commissioners, really wanted to prioritize, some shiny new objects. I mean, it was smart meters and all this. Well, their vegetation management budgets were slashed. So it's complicated, but I think what you're seeing now, potentially from the government's point of view, is this combination of modeling, technology, and then the coordination of federal responses when the utilities have to identify, particularly on federal land, we need to manage that vegetation. And in the past, for years, you didn't get really a response from the federal government on federal land. So I think, from my point of view, this announcement just the other day was one of the key factors that had always been an obstacle to maintaining your systems, particularly if you cross federal land. So I don't really have a question, but I appreciate the opportunity, Llewellyn, to probably make that observation. I'm glad you gave Doug a chance to have EPRI talk about the technologies that have been developed and deployed. And maybe I'll just turn to Rebecca, because certainly at DOE, PNL was one of the premier labs that we fed our modeling into on the system. And Rebecca, if you can just talk about the upgrades on that modeling, I think it would be instrumental for our journalists.
Absolutely. So there is a large modeling program that's been going on for several years across all of the laboratories that Mark is just referencing, the North American Energy Resilience Model. And this is an extraordinary modeling apparatus that's a platform, right? That's meant to take the best of all of the national laboratory capabilities and sort of have more operational concepts of resilience, right? So that you can do it in more of a instead of just in a planning time frame, you're using it in an operational time frame to understand different types of hazards and how they can cause multi-system problems, or that there's a compound or cascading hazard. How do those things affect the system? Meaning to telescope out. So this is all of the national laboratories. This is not limited to PNNL, but PNNL was the main holder of the responsibility there. Because of the extensive grid modeling that's required. I'm happy to put a link in the chat. The way that that's been working more recently, of course, is to take advantage of all of the knowledge that we have of now that we have the modeling capabilities. Not only can we do this on a sort of a regional scale or a national scale or a North American scale, but that we're also looking at how do we validate what we can model based on the experiences that we've had. And obviously wildfire is one of them that's been of keen interest. So one of the ways that that's been improved most recently has to do with tools like Radar Fire, which I know I answered one of the panelists' questions about this. Really extensive knowledge about fire line data, fire behavior. We need to make sure that we're using sort of best-in-class data inputs to that. That's one of the challenges, which is why some of the situational awareness technologies are so important, because then we really understand what occurred. But getting all of that data rounded out so that we really understand wildfire behavior. Wildfire is a multi-vector hazard. It's not a one. There's so many attributes to wildfire that make it a very complex phenomenon. So understanding wildfire, understanding a behavior, looking ahead at landscapes, and being able to understand what the grid level problems could be from those phenomena. So that's been a major investment from the Department of Energy for several years now. And it's a tool that's it's multi-lab. So I'm happy to talk to anybody more about it. We call it NARM colloquially, but NAERM, and several partners on this effort, because it's important to have sort of a validation process. But we've produced several studies that are sort of macro studies rather than just individual utilities. How is the grid more broadly affected? And what are these resilience attributes? I think Chris pointed that out a moment ago, that we're not just talking about a reliability event where you're trying to get back to 99.9999. We're talking about deeper, more systemic issues that are harder to model, harder to understand how they propagate in the grid. and so that we're doing a better job preparing the system, and then we're quickly at restoring the system when there's problems, so that we can catch those more complicated features, not just of the hazard, but how it affects the system at large. So of course, there's so many dynamics with the grid that makes it a very complicated effort. But appreciate that
Thank
shout
you
out,
very
Mark.
much.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, which is I find this surprising, is we haven't talked about AI, right? We haven't talked about the integration of the power, the computing power, the ability. I believe, and I just spent a couple days at an industry event earlier in the week that was focused exclusively on the electric sector and AI. I believe the data that Rebecca's talking about, and that Indy's talking about, and that Brian's talking about, the grabbing of that data, the aggregating of it, and the analyzing of it, and then ultimately the acting upon it. This is one of the places where I can actually visualize, I can actually see AI being helpful in the electric sector. That I don't think there's a dramatic leap between where we are now and where we can get using AI. There are a whole bunch of capabilities, sort of grid intelligence, situational awareness, meters, sensors, devices throughout the grid. Everything that Brian was talking about, from chlorophyll content to satellite to dew point, and being able to apply an algorithm to that will give us an enhanced toolbox beyond what we already have. So we didn't. I'm blown away that we haven't talked about AI yet, because it's been part of every conversation I've seen when you gather a bunch of electric industry thought leaders. But to me, that is one place where we might see more than just a linear improvement in our ability to address wildfires.
We might look at this in a future briefing, Chris. I have to move on now and take a question from Peter Bear. Peter?
I'd like to ask any of the panelists, really, if you had the opportunity, what would you say to President Trump about really important federal leadership that's not there now? What would you wish that you were seeing from the administration at this point on this very complex issue? Really, any of the panelists that have something that they'd like to pitch into the discussion on that.
I think I would, Peter, to your question, and I can't remember who mentioned it earlier. Suppressing fire is one thing. It's an annual event. If we're really going to get ahead of wildfires over the next 2 or 3 decades, a national education effort from the president in DC that educates the common citizens about the benefits of forest thinning and prescribed burns. We are going to need to burn more to burn less in the future. We're going to need to thin forests more than we ever have before, appropriately in an environmentally sensitive way. But we need to educate those private landowners and help the state agencies and the feds achieve this goal of bringing the forest back to where they were 100, 120 years ago. Not clear cut, forestry, which did occur, and that left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. But if we're going to get ahead of this, we need to manage these forests more aggressively for the benefit of us taxpayers, but also the long-term benefit on reducing the fire risk as a whole.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you. I'd like to take the last question from Adam Clayton Powell, the third, and then maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit about AI across the spectrum. Adam?
Well, I'd like to follow up on the question of technology and research that's been discussed the last few minutes, which is we know that our friends at Arizona State University and the University of Wisconsin have developed a tool for sensing in remote locations. We know that there's a fire research center in northern Florida, southern Georgia. This is what researchers call a wicked problem. That's a term of art, meaning many dimensions, many moving parts, societally important. So who are the leaders in the research community who are working on these problems around the U.S.? And is there a country or more than one country outside the U.S. which we can cite as a model in this area?
I'll just answer the last question because I think there's quite a lot of technology leaders, and you're seeing many of them right here on the call, Adam. One of the good news, I think I worked in this space for decades now, and This is an area in which there's a high degree of collaboration. It's really remarkable. People are sharing information. We're sharing best practices for wildfire mitigation across utilities, vendor solutions, established technology providers. So it's a really remarkable landscape. I'll let some of the others talk about that, but just to put a pin in it, I think it is really remarkable. Australia, I'm sort of gesturing to Tim here, is a country that we look at quite keenly because they have been working on wildfire for some time. I think bushfire is a better term of art. And the way that they're organized between the system operators and the utilities, some of the generating assets for hydroelectric, like we look at them quite keenly to understand how they're managing for bushfires in Australia and what sort of some of the next generation techniques are, at least from a regulatory and sort of institutional business management perspective. So I would point to Australia as a country that we're paying attention to. But back to the team.
I can comment on that briefly. When I arrived in California 12 years ago, I was pretty shocked to see that we didn't have a centralized public awareness tool for wildfire. And this is just something that has been in place in Australia for the longest time. And fast forward now to 2024 and 2025, we have a tool called Watch Duty, which operates across the West. And so I think I'd like to take the opportunity to advocate for the Watch Duty tool and encourage everybody, if you haven't, to download that tool and share it with your friends and family. Having awareness that a wildfire is nearby and threatening you or your family or your loved ones is just the lowest hanging fruit ever. But yeah, just to go back to the original question, Australia has been struggling with bushfires for as long as I was alive. And it's largely because you have these eucalyptus tree forests where it's essentially like gas to the fire. And so everything kind of comes together, and Australia has been the canary in the coal mine for what was coming for California. And now California was the canary in the coal mine for what now appears to be happening across the western mid US and even now in the East Coast. And so, I would say look to Australia, look to California, and now we're starting to see states like Colorado and the work that Brian's doing. He's not here anymore, but all of those are really great examples of concerted efforts that involve many different tools and strategies brought together into one comprehensive strategy. And I don't think it's fruitful for us to go ahead and try to reinvent the wheel and then try to learn from our own mistakes, because you've seen Australia make a lot of these mistakes, and there are people that have had many years trying to solve these problems that are more than happy to jump on a call and share those experiences and learnings. And you have the same dynamic in Northern and Southern California, and now in other states as well.
Thank you very much. We're coming towards the end of our time together. I'd like to jump back to what Chris was saying about AI. And as a last thought, to hear anybody's thoughts about how AI is going to change the situation vis-a-vis wildfires. Anybody want to take a jump in there?
Well, I'll kick it off. I'm sure others will have thoughts too, but I'll go quickly since that's what we're doing. I think AI is already changing some of the scene of fires. I think some of the agencies and utilities are using it to tremendous effect across the U.S. And I think that prediction is one piece of it. I think there's more to go in terms of connecting the dots for vegetation management and mitigation. We've done some partnerships recently with AI Dash and other AI providers to try and get to the multiple aspects as several of the panelists have referred to here.
Thank you very much. And Chris, would you like to add a final word? What is Anterix doing with AI?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it is, our company just provides the underpinning framework from a technology perspective, right? Broadband. It's introducing broadband into the utilities so they can take advantage of the wealth of the data lakes, the data pools that we're seeing and used it. I think Brian has suggested, obviously, and so did Indy. AI is already being used. To me, we're going to have a future where there's more and more data pieces of coming in from access points And that's a good future for the grid. It'll help us on a range of issues, including wildfire mitigation.
Thank you. You've had the last word, Chris. I'll hand it over. Now, I thank everybody for being part of this extraordinary hour together, and Martin Menzies will say goodbye, and I think thank you as well.
Well, thank you, Llewellyn, for being our producer and our moderator today. And I, too, would like to thank our panelists and journalists for participating, as well as our viewing audience for being with us today. We hope you found it informative and of value. You can find out, again, more about USEA at usea.org. And you can also catch up on our past virtual press briefings if you join our YouTube channel for exclusive content. So please consider joining USEA and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be able to have access to our full library of past virtual press briefings. And so until next time, I wish you all an abundance of affordable and reliable energy. Thank you very much.